Greetings, everyone. Happy Wednesday. All right. Good to see you all. Make sure your names are your actual name. I see a couple there that are not. That's important for roll taking. All right. Anybody have any questions for me? Anything you want to talk about? All right. Well, let's go right ahead and get started. You can always ask your questions in the middle too, if you have any questions. All right, so this is what we're going to be talking about today, biodiversity. So you've been learning a little bit about it in the lessons. What does that word mean? First of all, what does bio mean? When you see the prefix bio, what does that mean? Bio. Micah.
Doesn't the Greek word mean life?
Yeah, it means life. Sam, what does diversity mean? Tyler.
When there's a lot of variety of something.
Yeah, excellent. Variety is a perfect word. So biodiversity refers to the variety of life. So different parts of our world have different amounts of biodiversity. Basically, it is every living thing, every plant, every bacteria, animals, humans, right? And when we live all over this planet, there is life in almost every corner of our globe. Now, scientists have estimated that even though we've only discovered a little over 1 million species, there actually are probably closer to 9 million species of plants and animals that are in existence. So that means that there are still millions of other organisms that are a complete mystery to us. So we're going to talk about some of the biodiversity on our planet today. First, I just want to talk a little bit about discussion boards. I'm going to use them more and more as time goes on because they're really a good way for you guys to get to know one another a little bit. It recreates that classroom experience to some degree, and it helps you to see what other people are thinking. What are other people's comments about a particular topic? So I want to make sure that you understand what's required. So first of all, what I'm seeing whenever anybody loses points on a discussion board, it's almost always because the discussion board has 2 or more questions and you're only answering one, or you're not responding to the other student. That's often a part of the assignment, is to comment to somebody else. So just make sure that you're following the directions, read through the directions really carefully. If it tells you to upload a picture, upload a picture. Starting today, I'm not going to be accepting links anymore. So if you put a link in, I'm not going to give you credit until you go back and put it in there. Yeah, I expect we're 5 weeks in, so I expect you guys to be able to put in a picture instead. What's really important is that when you put your picture in, go out of that discussion board, come back in and look and see what your post looks like. If what you're seeing is a link, that's what everybody else is seeing too. If you see a picture, if you maybe you need to resize it, maybe it's huge, maybe it's really small, you can resize it that way too. And then when you're talking about the comments that you make on other students' work, think of that as a way to encourage one another. So you can comment on more than one. I require one, but you can comment on 10 if you want to. Just think about the kind of feedback that you would like to get if you posted something. So just saying something like good job or that sounds nice, that's not really very encouraging. That doesn't give your classmate any kind of valuable feedback. So I'm not going to be giving credit for those anymore. Just like 1 or 2 word good job, that's not going to be good enough. All right. And the final thing about discussion boards is you have to add your comment immediately after you submit your own post. If you wait hours or days later and you come back, I'll have already graded it and I won't have given you credit for it. So you have to put in yours, then everything will open up and you can see it and go in and put your own comments in there. I know you can always come back later and see what other people have said that wasn't there when you first responded. And of course, the first person to post in a discussion board, there isn't anybody else to respond to. So that's kind of a little, bonus that you get. If you're the first one there, you don't have to then comment on anybody else's work. All right, any questions about discussion boards? All right, I'm going to start requiring more of you. I've been grading them pretty easy until now, but I'm gonna start, applying the rules a little bit more. All right. Please don't submit any assignments incomplete. So as an example, there were a couple students who wrote in the where you had to put in your materials list for the seed experiment. They said, I haven't started the experiments yet. You have to wait until you start the experiment in order to submit that whole quiz. Don't submit it incomplete. I grade it as it comes to me. All right. And the final thing that I want to talk about today before we get into class is contributing here to our live class discussions that we have. Now, I know that it can be kind of intimidating to speak up. You guys didn't know each other at the beginning of the year. You're getting to know each other better now. So that's great. It's especially intimidating, though, to make a guess if you don't know the answer for sure. Think of it this way. Knowing the answer, raising your hand and answering it, that doesn't take any bravery at all. What takes bravery is making an educated guess, saying, I don't know, maybe this. I have a lot of respect for students who do that, because really every great discovery in science started with an unknown, right? A question that somebody had to ask, often even a mistake that somebody made. So when you share what you are guessing at, even if you're not correct, you're actually giving everybody else a chance to learn right alongside of you. So even if your answer isn't right, it gives us a chance to talk it out and figure out why it's not right. So I really encourage you all to, I think we've created a safe space here. Nobody is judging you. Everybody wants everybody else to be successful. So when you try to answer a question, don't be upset, don't be embarrassed if it's wrong. Just think of it. Oh, my bravery is showing when I do that. I'm showing how, what a good student I am, how much I want to learn. All right. So back to biodiversity now. So why do you think biodiversity matters? How would you answer that question right there, that statement? Biodiversity matters because, Aaliyah.
It helps keep an environment stable.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we can think about what something would be like if it didn't exist to understand how important it is. Like how important is food? Why does food matter? Well, imagine your life if you didn't have any, right? Why does exercise matter? Imagine your life if you didn't do any. Why does biodiversity matter? If we don't have biodiversity, we don't have a healthy, stable ecosystem. When we do have biodiversity, we do have that stability, that ecosystem that is healthy. So a healthy ecosystem has a high degree of biodiversity, and a low ecosystem has less, and it's less healthy, it's more fragile. So watch this little video that just introduces biodiversity.
Biodiversity is a term that represents the total variety of all life on Earth. That's a big thing to sum up. Thousands of different wild habitats, millions of different species, billions of different individuals, and the trillions of different characteristics they all have. The total biodiversity of our planet is immense, which is a good thing, because the more biodiversity, the more secure all life on Earth is, including ourselves. Only when life is at its most varied, vigorous, biodiverse, can we hope to thrive. We may not know it, but we need towering forests across 1/3 of the land surface to lock away carbon and keep the climate stable. We need millions of pollinators and billions of soil organisms and megatons of plankton to keep the food we eat in supply. We need strange plants deep in jungles to create our medicines, and coral reefs and mangrove swamps to protect the coasts we depend upon.
So I just like that guy. I think he's awesome. First of all, I'm just going to stop for a second and say thank you all for having your cameras on. What an amazing class when everybody has their camera on. So well done. All right. So what happens if a disease strikes a population with low species diversity? Michaela.
In some cases, it could essentially wipe them out, but in other cases, most of the time, it'll just take them a really long time to recover, or they'll have to move. But either way, they're going to be scattered and broken up.
Yep. Often that's the case. Toby.
In the case that a population that like a species does die out, the more reliant on that species the food web was in that ecosystem, the worse it gets. And the
Excellent.
more biodiverse it is, the less a system or ecosystem is reliant on any one species.
Yeah, very good. So it affects the species itself and then has a ripple effect out on other species. It's rare that there's damage to one species that doesn't have an impact on other species as well. Now, there's three different kinds of diversity. When we talk about biodiversity, we can look at genetic, species, and ecosystem biodiversity. So genetic just means the genes, the DNA that's involved. So the more differences we have in the DNA content among individuals within a species or a population, the more diversity it has. Then there's also species diversity. So this is the number of species and the variety of them that are in a particular area. And then ecosystem diversity is the number and variety of ecosystems or habitats within a given region. So you can think of like your state, the state that you live in, how many different ecosystems are there? If your entire state is desert, then you don't have a lot of ecosystems in there. If you live where there's both mountains and desert and streams and valleys and you've got lots of different areas there, then you have more species or more ecosystem diversity. So let's talk first about genetic diversity. So genetic diversity, that's the diversity within a species. So we're all humans. We have a lot of genetic diversity between humans. That's what we call the differences that we have in our DNA. Now we have a lot of DNA that we share that's similar between humans, but there's also a lot of diversity within that as well. So let's take a look at some species that have low genetic diversity. They don't have much difference in all of the species that live there as with regards to what we call the gene pool, the number of possible genes. So this one right here, this is one of the lowest genetically diverse organisms that we have on Earth. In fact, they're about 99.99% genetically similar. There's almost no difference in the genetics of the Channel Island foxes. So what happens if a disease comes in and it affects them? It's deadly to them. Micah.
I mean, it would really affect them terribly because with a lot of genetic diversity, maybe like some of them could mutate or have a certain or are able to resist against it better. But if all of them are the same and it's a really devastating disease for them, then it'd probably wipe all of them out.
Right. So it hasn't been that long ago that we were all dealing with COVID, right? And imagine if all humans were as susceptible to COVID as some of them were. We'd be gone. Our species would be gone. If we had 99.99% genetic similarity, we wouldn't have survived that. But we don't. We have a lot of diversity. So we didn't end up having a very high death rate after all. That's the problem. When low genetic diversity, a disease comes in, they're gone. Here's another one, maybe gone, depends. But here's another one. Koalas are an animal that has very low genetic diversity. So a lot of koalas died because of a couple of bacterial diseases that struck in Australia. They got this disease and they died. That left just a few to repopulate, to bring back the species. Well, they're just these few are the only genes that are left in the gene pool. So they have low genetic diversity, and scientists are actually really concerned about koalas' ability to adapt to anything more that happens to their species. Another species that has low genetic diversity is the sea otter. Anybody have any idea what happened to the sea otters that might be a cause of low genetic diversity in them? Anshu.
Didn't they get wiped out or nearly wiped out by some predator or hunting or something?
It
A
was
while ago?
predator. It was hunting. Which predator?
Killer whales, I think.
It was not killer whales, but that's a good guess because they're water animals. It was one even more deadly than killer whales. Humans. Yeah, yeah. So we hunted them almost to the point of extinction. Anybody know what they did with otter pelts back in the 1800s? Michaela.
They made them in like coats, and I think in some cases like shoes, but it's mostly like coats and pants to keep them warm and stuff.
Yeah, a big thing that they made with them were hats. Have any of you guys seen those top hats? Like, think Abraham Lincoln's hat, the big tall hat that he wore. That was made out of otter pelts, and it was a very, very desirable fur. Think how dense the fur is on an otter pelt. You know, very, very, very dense. So they were very valuable, and they were hunted and captured almost to the point that they were gone. In fact, they declined about 99%. About 99% of them were gone. So that left a very, very small gene pool. And that low genetic diversity, just having a few of those organisms left, meant that they had to breed with one another, right? So they were breeding with one another who had very similar genes. They ended up having a reduced gene pool, a reduced genetic diversity, and their overall health and fitness of the population was reduced as well. Toby.
I just thought of this, I'm not sure if it's exactly valid. There isn't another reason it's helpful is if like its prey evolves to some sort of, I don't know, becomes poisonous somehow. Well, then that could kill everyone off unless they were diverse, basically.
Yeah, really, that's a good point. Really, anything that can affect a group, a species, can have an impact, not only on themselves, but also on the organisms that they prey on and the ones that prey on them. Yeah. All right. I had a question just now from a student, a direct message. I want to address it. I still haven't submitted the exam with a question about why biodiversity is important. Listening feels a bit like cheating. What do I do? So I want to point out to you guys, that's not cheating, that's learning. So there's not really not a lot of difference between reading about it in a book and talking about it here in class. So it's not cheating. It's absolutely encouraged for you to pay attention and to learn from what we're doing here in class. So no problem there at all. All right. All right. Now let's talk about ones that have high genetic diversity. Once again, this is a big gene pool where genes are very different among members of the species. Anybody want to make a guess at what organism has the highest biodiversity? Aaliyah.
Humans?
You would think so. It's kind of funny because the organism they actually don't look very different from one another, where we look very different from one another. So you'd think we would have a lot more genetic diversity than they do, but we don't. We're not one of the highest. We do have a lot, but we're not the highest. Neil.
Fish, maybe any type of fish.
And you're getting closer. Good guess, getting closer. Micah.
Maybe like a species of bugs, like not ants, but something in the insects.
So you're on the right track, and we're going simpler and simpler with our organisms. So it's one that would be even simpler than arthropods, which is what insects would fit into. Sophie.
Could it be like the household mice?
It's not mice. That's a good guess too. Mice would be mammals. So it's even simpler than fish, even simpler than insects or other arthropods. Henry.
Would it be a type of bacteria?
Oh, not quite that simple. Good. You jumped down. But yeah, no, that's an excellent guess. It's somewhere in between bacteria and the arthropods. Michaela.
I'm not sure if this is considered bacteria, but maybe an amobia, or I don't know how I say it.
Amoeba. Amoeba. So amoeba are a protist. Amoebas are in one of those categories, but we put everything when it doesn't fit in any other category. Protists are the junk drawer category of the animal kingdom, where you just throw stuff that you don't know how else to classify. No, I'm gonna stop the guessing now, and I'll just reveal to you, based on current research, this nematode worm, shocking, isn't it? It is one of the most genetically diverse species on the planet. There is more variation here than there are in almost every other species. So it, definitely is up there. C. brenneri is the name of this particular animal. And surprisingly, another animal that has high genetic diversity is the African leopard. Seems pretty random. And sperm whales also have very high genetic diversity. Yeah, plankton. Yep. Nope. Not plankton is a category rather than a species. So plankton would be all the little organisms that live in the water. And there's many, many, many species of plankton. Yeah. African leopard, really? Yeah. Well, this is the most diverse. So you're right about that. All right. So a lot of people wonder about dogs too. They are highly genetically diverse because of all of the selective breeding that we've done. So people have taken dogs and turned them into what they wanted them to be. Look at all the different dogs there, but they're all called dogs. A large amount of genetic diversity. In fact, dogs are probably the most genetically diverse of all the animals we've domesticated. So we haven't domesticated worms yet. All right, and here's another species that has very high genetic diversity. Woody plants like trees, the ones that have wooden stems, wooden like bases, trunks, they tend to have more genetic diversity than grasses, the ones that would be what we would call vascular plants that don't have woody stems to them. So part of their diversity is due to the size of their range, how far they can spread their seeds, so to speak, their genetic information. So they can spread them a long way through wind or animals that carry them around. And okay, so what if we're not talking about animals here? If we're talking about all of life, all the living things, which one species has the highest genetic diversity? Anshu.
Mushrooms.
What kind of mushroom?
There's a specific type. I forgot the name.
Yeah, you're right. It is the split gill mushroom. It is the most genetically diverse species on record. Pretty crazy. Again, we're looking at the genetics. We're looking at the DNA inside the nucleus. How much variety is there from one split gill mushroom to another? How much variety is there from one of those roundworms than there is to another? All right, so that's all about genetic diversity. Now let's look at species diversity. The number of species, different species in an area. So that's determined by a couple things. It's determined by basically just how many there are, what is the size of the population, how many resources there are that they can have. Basically, the more species you have in a particular area, the better. So here we can see what causes a high species diversity. That would be a large number of different species. Look at community 1 here. There is a large number of many different species here. Large population sizes within those species. These aren't really large population sizes, but you get the idea. And then lots of available resources. The more resources there are, the better, because larger resources mean they can support a larger population. Low species diversity, see, these are almost all like this. It's a low number of different species, small population sizes within those species, and very few available resources. So when we're talking about ecosystem diversity, there's 2 that are really, really high. What's the most? What ecosystem would you say is, one of the 2 that are the most diverse? Aaliyah.
Rainforest?
Rainforest. Yep, that's a big one right there. What's one more? Henry.
In the ocean.
It's in the ocean, but there's a particular area in the ocean. Sophie.
A coral reef.
Yeah, coral reefs. Yep, those tend to be the most diverse. Why do you think they're the most diverse? Your hand's still up, Sophie. Micah.
Maybe they're really diverse because lots of area, lots of space, lots of resources as well.
Yep.
And the water is also quite warm.
Yeah, yeah. So they have lots of resources. The space that they have would be considered a resource that they have. So they have a lot of resources to support a large population and large number of species. So what about the least? What about the ecosystems that have the lowest species diversity? Once again, there's 2 of them. Leke.
A desert.
Desert is one of them. What's another one? James.
Would the Antarctic count as a desert as well?
Yeah. Well, kind of. So we don't necessarily call it like a biome. We don't call it a desert biome. It would be a tundra kind of a biome. So you know, these two areas here, the desert and the polar regions, would be among the least diverse. They just don't have many animals that live there. There aren't many organisms that live there. Why not?
I do think the polar regions would be considered a desert because of lack of rainfall as well.
Yeah. I mean, typically you're right. They don't have very many resources. There's a lack of rainfall. There's often a variety. There's characteristics that make something a desert, and it does fit within that characteristic. Yeah, you're right about that. Yep. So why? Why don't we see? Neil.
Because of the extreme temperatures.
Yep. So what does that extreme temperature lead to? Remember what
Yes,
gave
it's
us a
not.
high species diversity was lots of resources. Tyler.
They have less resources and
Yeah.
it's harder for them to live, so less species can thrive in that environment.
Yeah, exactly. When you don't have enough of all the things that you need to stay alive, then you're going to be, you know, that there's just not going to be as many species that are going to be there. So an ecosystem that has high species diversity is going to be stronger. It's going to be able to stand against threats more. One with low species diversity is going to be fragile. All right, so now let's look at the last one. That's ecosystem diversity. So when species diversity goes down, the whole ecosystem goes down. The whole ecosystem is less likely to survive stress, like diseases, like pollution, like disrupted food webs. You know, all these things, they're less likely to survive. Think about just the animal that if you've got one species that dies off, if there's lots of species in the area, then others can find food still. If they were the only one and they died out, then there's not going to be food for the other ones as well, anything that would prey on them. So we can get what we call cascading effects, where the ecosystem can actually collapse when we have problems if we don't have diversity within that ecosystem. So this would be ecosystem diversity would be bigger than that. It would be the number of ecosystems. So once again, think of your state. Think of your state as one that has either a lot of different ecosystems or not many. Do any of you guys live in a state where you would say we have a lot of ecosystem diversity? Blake, where do you want to tell us where you live?
Maryland.
Maryland, yeah, there'd be a lot in Maryland. So, like, give me an example of kinds of ecosystems that you would have in Maryland.
Like woody places, and then there's like grasslands, and there's what else is there? Just a few mountains in Maryland. So
yeah. Yep. So definitely some ecosystem diversity. Toby.
I live in California, so
Yep.
yeah,
So
we have like these giant redwoods all over the place, and we have these oak woodlands too.
Yep. Michaela.
I'm kind of just adding more to Toby's because I'm also in California.
Okay.
But we also have like different stream areas. Like if you go up by Lake Tahoe, which is a very large reservoir of water that's also connected to Nevada, there's a lot of diversity there. And then we have different areas from like north to south where it ranges in anything from temperature to appearance to animals.
Yep. So I spent a couple of weeks in California a few years ago. I flew into San Francisco, drove all the way down to San Diego, and then flew back home. And it's shocking how much change there is all the way along the coast. Many different ecosystems would be represented there. Yeah, Aaliyah.
Well, I'm in Texas, so there's like a bunch of different types of areas, like desert areas and then like swampy areas, and some even almost forest-like areas.
Yep. Micah.
I'm also in California, but in my area, in like central-ish LA, there is not much diversity. I guess I've
Well,
never been in North California. I've only been to like San Francisco furthest, but from my area,
right.
as
So
much.
that's a really excellent point, Micah, because when we're talking about ecosystem diversity, how big is the area? We have a lot of different ecosystems on planet Earth, right? We have fewer ecosystems in North America and fewer ecosystems in each state. And even within each state, there's a region. So your town, your LA area probably has lower diversity, definitely has
Yeah.
lower biodiversity,
That's
ecosystem diversity than the whole state does.
hmm
Yeah.
So I would say Southern California probably has less diversity than
Yeah.
Northern.
Yep. Yep.
It's like a
Absolutely.
desert.
So here are some factors that will determine whether or not your ecosystem is diverse or you have a lot of different ecosystems in your area or not. The climate, first of all, tell me the difference between climate and temperature. I'm sorry, climate and weather. That's what I'm looking at. Climate and weather. Tyler.
Weather is what something currently is, like what temperature or whatever it is right now. Climate is overall what it usually is in an area.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So climate would include things like your average temperature, your average rainfall, the average sunlight. So all of those influence the different kinds of ecosystems that can exist, right? You're not going to get a desert ecosystem in an area that just rains all the time. Likewise, you're not going to get a lush, beautiful green ecosystem in a place where you don't get much rain at all. So another thing is the geography and the physical features, things like mountains and rivers, coastlines. Coastline is going to give you a lot of different ecosystems than somewhere in the middle of the country is going to be, where there's no coast at all. Even the soil types are going to be different in different parts of our country, different states that we have. Then you have the ways that species interact with one another. So these would be all the species, the plants, the animals, the fungi, the microbes, bacteria, the small protists, all of those, whether we have competition or symbiosis or predation, those all shape the structure of the ecosystem. Because, as we've learned, coral reefs are built through cooperation between these coral and the algae. If we didn't have that species interaction, we wouldn't have the coral reefs that we do. And then there's disturbances. Anybody give me an example of a disturbance that might determine the diversity of ecosystems within a region? Looking for a hand that hasn't gone up yet. Anybody who hasn't talked much want to share? Go ahead, Aaliyah.
Natural disasters like hurricanes or wildfires or tsunamis.
Yeah, absolutely. They can change ecosystems, can't they? Sometimes they can destroy an ecosystem. Think of a flood that comes in and might take years for that ecosystem to begin to recover. Sometimes disturbances can create a new ecosystem. Can anybody think of a disturbance that might create a new ecosystem? Henry.
A volcano being formed.
Yeah, it's a very good example. So we got a volcano that puts its, lava down and lava hardens, and over time the pioneer species move in. Now you have the other animals and plants that begin to take over, and before long, well, sometimes it can be long, sometimes it can take a long time, but you have an ecosystem where you didn't have one before. Good. Toby.
Wildfire.
Yep. Wildfire can definitely either destroy or create a new ecosystem. There are some species of plants that do better. They have to have a burning every so often in order to allow the seeds to germinate. So that could create a new ecosystem. Sophie.
Either flooding or maybe if a meteor struck Earth.
Yeah, that would definitely do it, wouldn't it? Yep, that would definitely do either of those. Good. So another one is the evolution and adaptation. So over time, we know that species adapt to their local conditions. And what we're going to learn when we talk about evolution is if you have the genes that mean you're going to survive long enough to pass your genes on to the next generation, it's those genes that are going to be passed along. That's an adaptation, an evolutionary change that helps us to get these unique ecosystems. For instance, cactus live in deserts. They wouldn't do very well in salty coastal areas, right? And you're not going to find a mangrove tree in a desert because they have evolved to be perfectly suited for the environment that they are in. And then, of course, we have human influences as well. The way we use land, the way we build farms and cities, unfortunately, the pollution that we put into the air, even conservation efforts. You know, we can help with species diversity, or sorry, ecosystem diversity, when we try to conserve different areas too. So human influence can be either positive or negative for that ecosystem diversity. So if ecosystem diversity goes down, if it drops, like as an example, if we have wetlands that are drained, that's going to decrease the diversity in that ecosystem. If we clear a forest, that can have negative impacts. And here are just some of the negative impacts. Organisms adapt to the ecosystem that they live in. If the ecosystem disappears, so do the species that depend on them. So we could have loss of species in these areas. And we can have reduced resilience. What's that mean? What's resilience mean? Tyler.
Like when even when something happens to you, it's not gonna get you all the way down. You can just keep going.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, I would say that most of the humans that are on the planet today are fairly resilient, right? We made it through a pretty rough time, didn't we? And we survived. We thrived. You know, many of us are better off now because we know what we can do. So resilience is, I like that, Toby, bounce back ability. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, it's the ability to, in the face of some trials, still be okay. Well, if you have decreased ecosystem diversity, you have reduced resilience. So think of it this way. Having a lot of different ecosystems in an area, say in your state, that's kind of like a safety net where if one ecosystem is damaged, like maybe there's a drought that kills off all the grasslands, others can still provide resources. When you don't have as many ecosystems, the whole system is less resilient. It's less able to recover from these disasters. So another one is fewer ecosystem services. I'm going to push that aside for a minute because we're going to talk about that in a minute, but then disruption of human life. So certainly when we have reduced ecosystem diversity, we're affected. If the ecosystem that's lost is a forest, we're affected by that. If it's a farmland, you know, even disasters like floods when that come in, that can disrupt human life as well. So let's talk about these ecosystem services. So anybody want to take a guess what that means? What does the term ecosystem services refer to? Michaela.
Maybe services that maybe they are like used to like help an ecosystem, like if it's in need, like how there's like stuff to help fire aid. If there's a fire, maybe it's like used to help like restore the ecosystem.
Okay, that's a good guess. Definitely a valid thing. Think of the flip that around. Instead of that way, it's the other way. Ecosystem services are things the ecosystem does for us rather than things we do for the ecosystem. So good guess, but yeah, it is the way that people benefit from nature. So here are some ecosystem services. There are products that we get from an ecosystem. There are processes that help our world. And then there are non-material benefits that people get. So not things, but other things, other benefits that people get from ecosystems. So can you think of any? Can you think of any ways that you benefit from nature? Micah.
I mean, like trees give us oxygen, which we really need to breathe. So
Yep.
very simple, very important one. And
It is. We'd be in big trouble with that
use
oxygen. Good. Good. Aaliyah.
Maybe like how plants can provide medicines or give like natural remedies like teas and stuff.
Yep. Beautiful example. My favorite drinks are teas. Tyler.
We get fruits and vegetables from like trees and bushes.
Yep. Lots of all of our food. You know, all of our food directly or indirectly comes from nature. That would be an ecosystem service. What about that last one? Anybody have any examples of non-material benefits that you get from an ecosystem? Neil?
Tourism or anything
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah, recreation, tourism, Lake A.
Walks.
Yeah, we all like being out in nature, don't we? In fact, just being in nature will lower your blood pressure. Being in nature will lower your stress hormone levels. So you've got stress hormone called cortisol. You need a little bit. You don't want to have zero cortisol, but you don't want it to be too high. Just going out in nature restores it back to a nice balance. Yeah, so those are definitely some things that we benefit from. So you can see on this wheel here, all the different things that nature gives us. There are provisions, water, fish, wood. That's a big one. Imagine our world if we didn't have stuff made out of wood. Pollination, cool temperatures. These are regulating. Cool temperatures, they control flooding by holding back the soil, providing some so that erosion doesn't happen. Purifies the water when we have water trickling down through the soil, it cleans the water. So that gives us pure water to drink. It stores carbon, cleans the air. Then cultural would be things like education, recreation, aesthetic. That's the taking a walk out in nature idea. Stewardship. So that's taking care of the land. How many of you guys like to garden? Do we have any people here who enjoy gardening? That's stewardship. Do any of you have pets that you really enjoy taking care of? Yeah, that's stewardship. That's an example of stewardship. And then supporting, that would be habitat, biodiversity, photosynthesis, soil formation, food, clean water, and we go back here. You can see a lot of them overlap each other. So these are examples of ecosystem services. Once again, climate regulation, think about what would happen if it didn't, if we didn't have the earth regulating the climate for us. So ecosystems keep our oxygen and carbon dioxide at appropriate levels. It'd be really difficult. In fact, if we didn't have the plants taking in carbon dioxide and putting oxygen in the air, like we pointed out at the beginning, we wouldn't be able to breathe. Certainly would not have good regulation in our climate. Easy to imagine what would happen if we didn't have pollination. Almost all of our plants depend on pollination in order to be able to give us the food that we eat. Micah.
Isn't in some countries, some people have to self-pollinate plants because there aren't enough bees?
Really?
I feel like I read that in a book once, that certain countries have a lack of bees to the point where they pay people to pollinate flowers with like tool.
I'm looking that up. I do know that the bee population is in trouble. The bee population across the world. Okay, so this is in certain regions in China, particularly in the Sichuan province. Farmers have been forced to manually pollinate fruit trees due to a severe decline in wild bee population. Yeah, wow, that's crazy. I had not heard of that. Thank you, Micah. Yeah, so really sad is an understatement here. So the bee population is in decline. There's a lot of reasons for that. We can talk about those when we're talking about insects later in the year if you want to. But yeah, a lot of things that we've changed that has dropped the bee population a lot. So we don't want to start to have to pollinate them ourselves. Basically, don't kill bees. If a bee's bothering you, walk away. Leave it alive. Yeah, Michaela.
I know it also depends on the plant because, for example, I have a butternut squash plant at my house, and I have to actually self-pollinate all of it because my bees aren't able to get it pollinated correctly or given enough pollen. So I know it just depends on like how the flower is shaped and how much pollen it produces. Because I know some people with certain types of plants, it's the majority of it you have to self-pollinate because the bees aren't able to do the job properly.
Yeah, that's interesting. So this would be an example of how human intervention changed nature. So probably you're trying to grow a plant in an area where it's not native. And by bringing it in, you don't have the species that have evolved alongside it, that coevolution where two species evolve together in order to be able to, one gets pollinated and the other does the pollinating. When that's the case, we a lot of times have to step in. Yeah, excellent point. All right, another one we talked about here, that's soil erosion is prevented by plants. You know, they help to hold the soil in place, keeping it from being washed away. And here's what can happen if it's washed away. If a location gets really heavy rain, the soil can get really wet, and really wet earth can act a lot like a liquid, and it starts sliding down these slopes. So this is what we call a landslide. It can be very dangerous. So plants help to prevent that. And like I said before, water is purified as the water passes through the different levels of the soil. Organisms, chemicals, things are often trapped in the soil, and that makes our water safer for drinking. Here's one we haven't mentioned: energy production. We get a good bit, not a majority by any means, but a good bit of our energy production in the United States is by these hydroelectric dams. That's another area that we get an ecosystem service. And then here are some of the cultural services that we have. So we talked about these: culture, economic, recreation, scientific, educational. These are all things that we get from nature. So let's look at, in the time we have left now, let's look at a couple of little case studies. So I want to, I'll ask you some questions about these, and we'll see how these relate to the ecosystem diversity. So first we're going to look at genetic. Remember back what genetic diversity is. This is the number of genes that are in the gene pool of a species. So farmers in South America grow a type of corn that comes in many colors: blue, red, purple, yellow, even black. Scientists wondered, why keep all these varieties when plain yellow corn produces the highest yield? All right, so what role does genetic diversity play in the survival of crops? In other words, why would we not want to do what those scientists are wondering? Anshu.
If some kind of disease or rot hits your only yellow corn fields, then you might just lose them all.
Yeah, exactly. So there's certain varieties that would be resistant to that. Some of them might be resistant to drought. Some of them might be resistant to pests. Others might have special nutrients in them that might be helpful. So what they found is that during a dry season, these multicolored corn yields actually had better harvests than the ones that were planted with only yellow corn. So when everything is kind of normal, the yellow corn does better. When it's drought, the colored corn did better. Micah.
Another interesting point is not just the survivability which it benefits, but I think it also plays a huge role in culture too. I
Yeah.
think, especially in South America,
Yeah.
colored corn is much more popular.
Yeah. Yep. You're right about that. Tyler.
I could be wrong, but I feel like I remember colored corn used to be ground up like once it got hard to make paint.
Really? Making
I feel
paint
like I
from
remember
colored-
learning that one time. Like sometimes corn is soft and you can bite into it, but sometimes it's harder, and so they would grind it up and mix it with water.
Okay, so yeah, I'm not, that's not the answer. I got a recipe for making paint with cornstarch when I looked it up. All right, corn was historically used to make paint, though not in the same way modern commercial paints are produced. Historically, various parts of corn, primarily the starch from the kernels and the pigments from colored varieties, were used as components in paint. This practice was common among early civilizations, particularly Native American cultures. Awesome. Excellent point. Yeah, this is great. I love this. I love this kind of discussion. So yeah, definitely. I mean, personally, I like the beauty of that too. I think that's not just survival, but I'd rather have that hanging on my front door than just yellow corn. All right. So now, why might it be important to preserve these traditional crop varieties, even if they're not the highest yielding? I think we touched on that. We kind of answered that one. It gives them a better chance of survival. There are different uses for it. And like we pointed out, when it's a dry season, the colored corn does grow a little bit better. So other examples where having more variety is helpful. in nature or in life? Aaliyah.
I think it's like in a human perspective, it would be like what we talked about before, where it's like when there's a big disease coming over the earth like COVID, since there were more people who had higher immunity, then they could stay safer, and then that's why the whole human population didn't decrease by too
Yep.
much.
Yep. Excellent. Excellent. That would be immune system functions that we have because we have so much variety. Yeah. Another place, variety, remember the dog picture I showed you? If we all held up pictures of our dogs, we would see a lot of variety. And we all like that. Everybody thinks their dog's breed is the best, right? Even having different tools for different jobs. This is an example of where variety is better. Look at the different homes that there are in your town. People like variety. Sometimes we have too much. When you go to the grocery store and you need to pick out a tube of toothpaste, I think I wish for less variety. Cereal aisle is, two aisles long. All right, excellent. Let's look at another one here now. So this is an oyster reef puzzle. So in the Chesapeake Bay, oyster reefs are making a comeback. They were doing very badly. Oyster reefs dropped down to almost nothing, where they were not getting oysters. It used to be 100 years ago, about 90% of all the oysters that were consumed in the United States came from the Chesapeake Bay. That number dropped down to, well under 10%, closer to 1%. But now they're coming back. They're doing some things that are bringing the oysters back. When they did, researchers noticed something surprising. When more fish, crabs, and worms moved into the reef, the oysters themselves seemed healthier. So how does species diversity help the oysters survive and thrive? Why are the oysters doing better? Because there's fish, crabs, and worms in there now. Toby.
First of all, disclaimer, I know nothing about oysters.
Okay.
Maybe something that ate the oysters decided the fish, crabs, and worms are tastier?
That's a possibility. That's definitely a possibility. One major thing about oysters, the reason that they're working so hard to bring them back, oysters are filters. They do a really good job of filtering water. So it used to be when they were at their height, the oysters in the Chesapeake Bay could filter the entire bay in about 3 days. So every one oyster per hour filters about 5 liters of water per hour, one oyster. Now, instead of it taking 3 days, now it takes about a year to filter all the water in the Chesapeake. So that's a major, major thing. Well, as they've started building up these oyster reefs, one of the way that they're doing it is by creating artificial reefs and putting in more hatchery bred oysters to try to increase them. So what might these small fish be doing, the crabs be doing, the worms be doing that might be helping the oysters to recover? Tyler.
Maybe their waste is like a fertilizer for them.
Yeah, yep. That's a possibility too. Some of the small fish eat some of the pests. Where we learned about the fish that eat the cleaner fish. They eat the parasites. Some of the small fish do that. Worms recycle nutrients. So with all these species together, the oysters can grow larger. They can filter more water. So our next question there is, what might happen if there were only oysters there without the other species? How might that impact that oyster reef ecosystem? Basically, all the things that the other animals are doing wouldn't happen. Because the fish eat some of the pests, some of the parasites, that wouldn't be cleared away. Crabs actually clear away a lot of the debris that's there. That wouldn't happen. So the debris would build up. The reef would overall be less stable and less productive. All right, one more quick question, then we're done for the day. How is this example here different than the cornfield we were just talking about before? Here's your hint. Oh, go ahead, Tyler.
Corn is all kind of under the same umbrella, like it's all corn, even if it's different colors, but this, like within one species, but these are different species. So
Yep.
it's more of like ecosystem diversity than species diversity.
Yep. So it's more, this is species diversity. The cornfield was genetic diversity. So this is different species in this ecosystem. But you're absolutely right. The cornfield was just one species. It was just a single corn species that we were talking about, whether it was different colors or not. It was one species. This reef, we have a lot of different species and there's a lot of diversity there. So both of them are going to improve resilience, but they're different levels of diversity, where the corn one was genetic diversity, the oyster reef is species diversity. And we're going to stop there. Anybody have any questions? All right. Great job today, everybody. Have a good week. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.